welcome. You're tuned into the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Dave Schrader, along with me, Tim Dennis. Things are popping. It's exciting here. The buzz is going great for Darkness Radio. We will be making a big shift coming, of course, in about a week and a half here with our switch over to mid-roll. So we want to thank all of you, our amazing listeners who've been sending in messages and letting us know you're going to be following us and will follow us anywhere. That means a lot to Tim and I, especially going on 15 years of doing this program. So thank you very much. And please spread the word. As soon as we drop the new ways to find the show and listen, please drop it and let your friends, family, and neighbors know about the change as well, so that we can continue to grow the Darkness Army and continue this fascination with the supernatural and understanding what's behind it. That's what we all seek, right? The answers. We want to understand what it is that comes next. What are these unseen forces around us? And to many of us, it's a hobby. It's an interest and a fascination, something that captures our imagination and takes us almost into another realm. To others, it can be a very dangerous prospect, especially if done improperly or without any real knowledge or understanding of the things that they're getting involved in. Our guest today has a new book called Playing with Fire, a modern investigation into demons, exorcism, and ghosts. Billy Hallowell has been working in journalism and media for more than 2 decades. His writings, interviews, and social commentary have appeared in Desert News, The Blaze, Human Events, Mediate, and FoxNews.com, among other outlets. He has served as the faith and culture editor of The Blaze, senior editor of FaithWire, and he has written 4 books. Hallowell has a BA in journalism and broadcasting from the College of Mount St. Vincent in Riverdale, New York, and an MS in social research from Hunter College in Manhattan, New York. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here today with us, Billy.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Listen, the world is intrigued and always has been with the nature of spirituality and the possibilities of unseen forces that surround us at all times. Why do you think that's so important to human nature to question and desire and want to know these things?
I think there's a baseline question of where did we come from, right? Why are we here? These are the basic, existential questions we all have. And so a lot of us go on the quest to try to answer that. I think everybody does at one point or another, try to figure that out. And people land in all different places. For me, I land in the Christian realm. I'm a Christian. I believe that answers the questions the best, and it answers them fully. And so we go on that quest, but I think there's this other element that is so fascinating to me when it comes to these issues of paranormal or experiences you can't explain. And the reality is that since the beginning of time, right, in addition to that quest of trying to understand who we are, where we come from, we have people who are telling us that they've had these experiences. They can't explain them. They don't really know what they are, but they know that something has either happened around them or to them. And when you go out there and you start asking the public, hey, do you believe in ghosts or do you believe in demons? It's really fascinating to look at the results of what people say. You've got 45% of Americans saying that they believe that demons exist. I mean, that's pretty noteworthy, right? And it comes from not just the current, but that past history, I think, of those experiences that have been passed down. So the demonic realm, it's interesting, right? Because I don't know that at this point, is there that much of the population that would even admit that they believe in a god? Well, this is the interesting thing. When you go and you look at the data, you still have 68%, I believe, of Americans saying that they're Christians. And when you actually dive in deep, you have a growing group of people in this country who they're the nuns. They're not the Catholic nuns, but they're the people who say, you know what? I don't really know what I believe. I'm either an atheist or an agnostic, or I'm not committed. And that group has really grown since 2007. It's up to about 25% of the public. But you really have a very solid, majority still saying they believe in a god. And so that takes different forms, obviously. And again, 68% of the public saying that they're Christian. Now, whether or not they actually are is another story. So, but what is fascinating about that, let's say 68% of the public is is Christian. Well, you should see that the demon belief line up to that, because the Bible, it's fascinating. You read the New Testament, it is filled with stories of people being healed from the demonic.
So what exactly, I mean, do we have an understanding of what is, quote unquote, the demonic? Because in today's society, we are a finger-pointing culture. Everything that happens is the fault of something else. It can't be that I'm just weak-willed and like porn. It can't be that I just enjoy the smell of cocaine. It can't be, right, that I enjoy rum and Coke. It's got to be that it's an affliction, a demonic affliction,
sure,
breaking me down, and pedophilia is just the demons working. People are just broken. I mean, we know this, right? If children that were born and didn't have parents, you know, a lot of these, remember the stories about the Russian orphanages where these children were not cuddled, they were not maintained and taken care of, and in the Ukraine, and they were kind of dysfunctional. They sociopathic and this disjointed connection. So does that mean that they're demon infested, or does it just mean that their principal makeup is one that doesn't allow for caring and compassion?
Yeah, and I think this is the key question, right? Because there are some people, right, especially you go into charismatic circles in Christianity, there are some people, and I'm not saying this is all charismatics, it's a small group of people, but they believe that everything is demonic, right? So the examples you're giving, everything is demonic. There's a demon behind every doorway. Then there's a group of people in the Christian realm and in public in general who are like, oh no, demons don't exist. That's just whatever. It either existed at one point in time and it stopped, or it no longer exists now. And so those are two polar extremes. What I found fascinating when I was writing Playing with Fire and diving into interviews, you know, I spoke with mental health professionals, I spoke with priests, I spoke with pastors and theologians, and I spoke with people who had gone through what I would call very extreme circumstances. These are the rare cases where people believe they were possessed, right? And that they had a healing from that possession. So that's a very rare thing. But the question you're getting at, and I thought this was interesting, you know, the discussion of somebody who has gone through some of the circumstances you just mentioned, that a lot of times evil, first of all, people make bad decisions. Let's start there. We have free will. We can choose. We're broken. We can choose to do bad things. That's not always because somebody or an enemy or evil put an idea into our heads. Sometimes we just make bad choices and they have consequences, right? Sometimes we do evil things because we have the ability to make those choices. But there is an argument that some experts in the book made. And by the way, I present this in a journalistic lens. So I'm interviewing people. I'm allowing people to make the determination they want for the most part on the claims that are being made. But I found it compelling when you talk to some mental health experts and some pastors who would say, well, if you find yourself in a circumstance where something bad has happened to you, where there's been an abuse of some sort, it can leave you more open to be preyed upon by evil. So it doesn't mean that all of your decisions are necessarily being caused by that, but that brokenness that might happen to somebody could actually open a doorway for that to enter their life. And I thought that was interesting. But we have to be careful with that because it's very easy to explain away or excuse away every action that somebody has by saying, oh, I was just being controlled by evil, right? And just to add to that, when you read, and again, I'm a Christian, I go at this through the Christian lens because I think it really does the best job of explaining what evil is, why we have it, and the solution to what evil is. But when you look at what Scripture says, right, about evil, it says that there's an enemy that seeks to kill, destroy, that seeks to separate from God. And there's a lot of discussion about culture. And so I am not closed off to the idea, and I know the experts I spoke with are not either, that there is an influence in culture that is rooted from evil. Now, we make the choices of how we're going to engage with that and the decisions we're going to make. But I think there's some compelling arguing to be made on that side, if that makes sense.
Well, do you believe then that demons are entities? Or, you know, I mean, we know that, you know, according to the Bible and the Scripture, that Lucifer and his followers were cast out and given, as I understand, dominion over earth until the end times. And that's when hell and heaven and everything will be divine. But does that make a fallen angel a demon? Are demons something that predate mankind and the angels? Are they something that were inherent to the planet, like air and water? Or what exactly, in your estimation, is a demon?
Well, so this is what's so interesting. And everything you just brought up, they're all points of debate that are so fascinating, right? Like when did angels make a decision? At what point did they decide, okay, 1/3 of the angels are going to go with Lucifer, right? When did that happen? Do angels have free will continuously? It seems in scripture that they do, but that they're unlikely. Maybe they made that decision at one point. They're unlikely to turn against God. But if they have free will, technically, could an angel become a demon still, right? Like they've been an angel the whole time and they make this decision suddenly to say, I'm no longer going to abide by God. I'm going to change my mind. Now, those are all questions we might not be able to answer, but I get into them in Playing with Fire. I think it's interesting. Even the nature of what demons are is actually debated. The vast majority, and we did a survey for this book through HarperCollins where we went to faith leaders in churches. It wasn't just pastors, but people in leadership positions. And we asked them what they believed. And the vast majority of them believe that angels are fallen, that demons rather are fallen angels. But there is a small percentage of people, and there are theologians, and I cover this in the book, who believe this, and they're well respected, that angels are actually not turning into demons, that demons are actually rooted in something called the Nephilim. And you see that the Nephilim mentioned only twice in the Bible, in Numbers and in Genesis, and we don't have a lot of information on what they are or what they were, but there's a whole other theory on the nature of angels, which is fascinating. So, you brought up a lot of fascinating pieces of the puzzle there. I think the idea is that these forces are in existence and that they have the ability, if you allow them in, to wreak havoc upon people. Now, what form does that take? If you look at Scripture, if you look at the Bible, right, you're not given a reason why people are possessed. We don't know why these individuals that we're confronted with in the Bible have demons, and some of them have more than one, we're told. Mary Magdalene had 7, apparently. And so we don't know how it happened, and I think that's fascinating. But we do confront these individuals who are acting erratically, who are experiencing this suffering, and they're healed from it, right? So the idea is that these are spirits that can actually control you and get inside of you if you allow them to. And we can have a whole conversation about what the Bible says about what opens people up to those things. But that is fascinating. Now, can they roam around and knock books off of shelves and physically on their own without inhabiting a person do something like that? Well, that's a debate that people will have. I can tell you there are plenty of stories of people saying, I had books flying off my bookshelf. I had things breaking. And I want you to remember, I'm a Christian. I'm a journalist. I come at things from fact. And so I find it fascinating that there are so many things in life when it comes to this realm that we don't always document. We don't have documented proof of it. Although I will tell you that in this book, there are stories, and there's one in particular that actually does have documentation behind it. And I find that very, very compelling.
Well, let's start there. Do you mind? Could you give us some background and history into the story?
Absolutely. Now, this is one of the reasons. I know for you, this is something you cover on this show. For me, I've covered tough topics. I wrote a book on the end times. I like to come at topics that I think are tough for people in general, but often for Christians to talk about. And I think the end times and this topic in particular would fall into that category. So the case that I'm referring to happened out in Gary, Indiana. And it was a mother and her 3 kids and a grandmother, so the woman's mom, living in a house out in Gary. And I'm sure you know this case.
I do, very much, yes.
This was very compelling to me because at the time I was a reporter with The Blaze. I was the faith editor there when this story broke in 2014. And we were covering the story and we're reading the Indianapolis Star. And I'm finding it remarkable that a mainstream outlet has written, and it was I'm sure you've read it, a fairly lengthy story, and what differentiated it from anything I had seen before. And I had covered The Conjuring and the real life story behind The Conjuring and all of that. But what really set this one apart was that you had documentation. You had people on the record, not just the mother and the kids and the grandmother, but you had people coming into this circumstance who were nurses, doctors, CPS workers, police officers, who were then going on the record, because this happened in 2011, I believe, going on the record in 2014 and saying, we saw these things. And not only are they saying they saw these things, these strange things, we can get into what those are, there are documents filed with CPS saying, and I can't even believe I'm saying this because it sounds so bizarre, but that a little boy one of the children walked up the wall and basically flipped over and landed on the ground on his feet in front of a room of people. And so you get into these details, and it was fascinating. And so it really captivated me. And I cover this in the book, and in Playing with Fire, I actually spoke with one of the sheriffs as well as the priest who handled that case. And it was just interesting to hear them confirm details in separate interviews about very minuscule things that had happened inside the home when they went in to investigate. And so it's a very, very lengthy, large conversation, obviously, of what went on in that case, but I think it's one of the most compelling that I've encountered.
Agreed. And, I know we talked about that case quite a bit, and even spoke with the priest involved in that case on our radio show. It is a very compelling, unusual, and bizarre story, no doubt. It leaves us then at the answer with, why would a child be afflicted like this? How does this happen to the innocent? And it puts into question, which I'm sure is the enemy's plot, right? Questioning God. Where is God in these moments? And we have free will. I think what a lot of people have problems with is, well, I'm a father, and these are my children, and I can turn them over to the devil because they're mine. That doesn't hold water in 2020. They're not mine. They're my charges, but I don't have reign over their souls, or I would be God. I don't have control over their destinies and fate, or I would be God. They should have a choice. So these parents that give their children to evil, that, this premise, or that they did something, the sins of the father revisited on the son, that seems, you're a Christian, that seems like a load of BS to me. What God would allow that to happen?
Well, and I think that's a question I deal with in the book, because when you go through the Bible and you read and you look, there are two instances in Scripture, and I think they're really overlooked. There's the healing of a possessed little boy, and then there's the faithful Canaanite woman whose daughter is described as being young. And so the assumption is you're dealing with two children here that Jesus is specifically asked by the parents who are pleading to heal. And I go back to what I said before, which is we don't know how people ended up in this state, and specifically, how would a child end up in that state? And so, yes, you brought up one of the common discussion points would be that the sins of the parents could carry on into the lives of the children. What has been interesting to me, and some of these cases I was not able to put in the book because people didn't want to share them, but there are people who have had parents who, it's not so much the issue of the sins of the parents as much as it is actually physically putting children in a situation where a door would open, and actually bringing these kids to places or engaging them in activities that would be seen as opening those doors. I think when I presented this to faith leaders, there's a struggle, admittedly, for them to really express and explain why. Why is it that a child could be afflicted in this way? And so I think it's a valid question to ask. I do think some would say it is real. Some would say, yes, it's the sins of the father, but others I think would say, well, what about those activities? It's very hard to protect a child or anybody. If you open the door and you're playing with things maybe you shouldn't be, right? Playing with fire, hence the name of the book. Even if you bring your child into that, I guess you are potentially, and this is just one theory and people may not like it, opening that door for your kids to be afflicted or oppressed. And I think we have to draw a distinction too between oppression and possession, but the two stories we see in the Bible, and I can only assume they are intentionally there, tell us that children can also experience this. And that is, I think that's terrifying for any parent to consider.
Agreed. But again, then that seems to fly in the face of free will, that I can prop a door open that would then afflict my child or my wife, or, you know, I mean, the whole subservience of the Bible is pretty outdated at this point. I mean, is that a fair assumption?
Well, you know,
the subservience of woman and children to the man of the house is what I'm referring to, not to God. But
yeah, I mean, I think people misread. So I think there's a lot of misreading of that in Scripture, and I think a lot of assumption, right, of how that should manifest, right? So I would actually argue that I think people will look at the Bible and say, oh, you know, this is outdated, but they're not necessarily understanding context and the way things are being described, and really the cultural aspects of things. I mean, you look at the story of, if you go and look at Jesus's resurrection, who's reporting Jesus's resurrection first? It's women, right? I mean, they're the ones running and telling everybody we saw this, and that's actually pretty remarkable when you consider the time frame of when that was written. So I think there's a lot going on in Scripture that becomes misread. But to answer your question, I guess it's similar. If we're going to think of spiritual illness as being similar to, and I'm not comparing, I'm saying there are different forms of illness: physical, mental, spiritual, right? If you bring your kid into a drug den and a crime happens and your kid's affected by it, well, that was your free will as a parent, but you opened your child up to danger, right? So I think the concept would be similar here. So I understand your point on the free will of it, but I do think what is so interesting, and we don't know how the people we see in Scripture were afflicted. We don't know how it happened. So it's hard for us to solve that question. I think it's one of the mysteries here. But if the idea is that by opening a door, it's almost a free for all. It's not like you're saying to Satan, I'm opening my heart to you, but if you're inviting those beings in, that you are actually afflicting anybody who might be in the realm of them, unless those people have the protection, and this would be under the Christian realm of the Holy Spirit, right? The idea that the Holy Spirit can't live inside of a person, which, by the way, there's a debate about this too, live inside the person alongside evil. But a child may not have that protection yet. So there's a lot going on there, and I think it's fascinating. I can't solve it all, but I do present it to everyone to give people, and I didn't want to shy away from that, because I think the two children that's the most stirring part of this issue to me in the Bible, is that children can be possessed.
Right. Now, let me ask you, and again, I'm asking simply your perception of these moments. And I understand as a journalist, usually you don't invest your version. It's allowing people to tell their stories and reporting it objectively that way. But these afflictions of demons, we understand that the Bible was written in a way that a lot of it is parable. And a lot of it is, you know, Jesus was great at storytelling, and not just do it this way because I said so, but listen to how this works. If you do this and do that, this man grew up to be successful while the other failed and lived a life of squalor, right? So he gives stories so that there's something people can attach to. Could the reason that we don't know how these people became afflicted by demons, because we're misinterpreting what a demon is that it's not a being or an external force, but it is a part of us in our human nature that is our weaknesses, and it's our vices. And listen, you know, we are born, our original sin is that it's all about me, right? As a baby, feed me, pamper me, you know, play with me. It's all about me. And the ego, the arrogance, the cruelty of children towards one another, that's all the demon of who we are. That's just the shadow aspect of our humanity. Could it be that Christ was not necessarily evicting or that any of the prophets were evicting a being, but rather a force of who we are, showing us that there is this internal struggle, right? Like the Native Americans speak about the two wolves, you know, there's the dark wolf and the light wolf. Which one will win is the one that you feed most. That seems like the same kind of stories that Christ was telling. By coming to Christ, by coming to the believers, they were healed of these afflictions. By laying of hands, by the speaking of prayer, they were given strength to beat back these issues that were overwhelming them. So could it be that demons are not an external force, but an internal aspect of us, and that we have given life, breathed life into the demonic realm by our insisting that it exists, by our giving it energy and faith and some prayer, and by evolving an idea into a tulpa or thought form of what evil is. And then it's easy for us as humans to grip, like we started at the beginning of this conversation, to grip onto something to say, oh, this is obviously why. Dave visited Waverly Hills Sanitarium and came up against some dark elements. He made this bad choice because something afflicted him, something changed him. Or, is it that just seems like a very easy concept to me. And I know there was a lot to unpack there. So
I love that you went into all that. I think so. I'll tell you what I think. I believe they are entities outside of ourselves, but I believe that they prey upon the things you described that are inside of ourselves, right? So, and I know not everybody believes this. This is my take on this: is that the weaknesses that we have are often exploited and used against us. And now, what you're describing, though, I think the first part of it I really resonated with, because I think we all struggle with different things. And I think the last thing we want to do is make excuses for bad behavior again. And I think you're absolutely right that it's easy to do that. I think the problem we have is that when you look at these stories in Scripture, there are enough of them, and they're different enough, and there are enough elements in them, including the casting of demons into pigs, which is a really strange, and it pops up in more than one gospel, of Jesus casting these demons into pigs. They are presented as entities that are not only different, but different and outside of ourselves, but able to discern and understand who Jesus was. They knew what they were dealing with. And I found that very compelling and intriguing. I had never looked at this as a lifelong Christian. I had never gone into Scripture and looked specifically at this issue. And when you do that, it really shows you a lot. I mean, there's a large, I think, paradigm here of information that we have to kind of distill and sort through. So while I understand what you're presenting there, I think it's very clear that, in Scripture, that these are not, internal things only. They are external, and that they can overtake our lives. Now, I do think you have to be seeking these things out. When you go into the Old Testament and you look at even the New Testament, and I know some people won't like hearing this, and I'll probably get hate mail for it, but we're told avoid divination. These are not things you're supposed to be messing with, right? Avoid, and I would say that would extend to things like the Ouija board. Now, most people will use the Ouija board without ever having a problem, but some people report having a problem. Now, are they lying? I do not think that a lot of people are lying when they say they've had problems after that. The challenge we have with the internal piece is that so many of these cases, going back to the beginning of time, and not just the cases, not just the individual experiences of people who have said, hey, I've dealt with this, I've felt this, I've struggled with it. That's compelling to me. The Indiana case, the Exorcist, the real life case that is based on, which I cover in Playing with Fire as well.
Right.
But I think,
yep.
Yeah. And I think going deeper, though, into what mental health providers are saying, you're seeing an increase of people who are willing to actually come forward and say, listen, and these aren't crazy people. These are people who deal with this day in and day out, that it's very rare, but that there are cases that they cannot explain. And I've talked to exorcists who have told me, listen, this particular hospital calls me 3 times a year and says, we need your help. It has to be off the books. We do not know how to deal with this situation. So critics will say, well, yeah, it's an intense form of mental illness, but a lot of mental health professionals, at least a number of them, and some of them are quoted in the book, some are off the record in the book without their names, but they're all compelling and interesting people, would tell you, well, that's not the case. We are dealing with something that not only have we seen, we've actually seen healing from it, and it's not a mental element always.
Right. And I want people to understand, I'm not dismissing, and I am not, it's not my intention to dismiss the concept of demons. I believe in the demonic realm. I believe there are dark forces at play. I just don't know. I'm not willing to easily label it as others are. As you know, I'm on a show called The Holzer Files. We run into some really dark, creepy moments. It'd be really easy to attribute it to a demon. I don't believe that's often the case. And taking the time to really evaluate the situation, my own level of fear going into it, the predisposal of being in a dark place, in a dark way, in knowing the history and the stories that have been reported there, it's easy to take what occurs and turn it into something evil. And I don't know that that's, the case. You might get a kick out of this. I know our listeners, I've told the story throughout the years, but we had a listener who contacted me and she said, Dave, I need help. I've got a demonic force in my house. I'm afraid it's trying to hurt me and afflict me. And I said, well, how? Talk to me about this. What happened? She said, well, I was sitting in my living room and I've got collector plates on the wall. My grandmother's collector plate flipped off the wall and shattered on the floor. And then she started to tremble and cry. And I said, okay. And she nodded. Yeah, that's it. It broke the plate. And I said, did it make a pentagram on the floor? No. Did it spell out 666 or die? No, that's ridiculous. I said, so a plate flung off the wall, shattered on the floor, and that's a demon. It was my grandmother's favorite plate. And I said, okay. I said, I'm not trying to dismiss it, but let's just evaluate this. So today in roll call in hell, Satan says, all right, let's start a war. Let's drop the economy. Let's spread COVID. And you go break grandma's plate. It just doesn't seem like that's the realm. Is that like his idiot nephew who can't hold a regular job gets that job? And she kind of laughed like you did. And I said, can I ask you something? How do you know that was grandma's plate? Well, she always had it. And I said, where did she get it? Well, she got it from her mother-in-law. And I said, what was their relationship like? She goes, well, she couldn't stand her mother-in-law. I said, could it be that grandma's just telling you, get rid of the damn plate? And she laughed and she said, that would totally be what my grandmother would have done. And I said, okay, so don't jump to the demonic. Don't give them that power over you by showing fear and allowing 100%. This. Then she said she never had problems with it again. And that was the case by re-examining and reevaluating situations instead of allowing it to become your owner. The fear of it, the fear of Ouija boards. If you go into it with fear, the intention that you put into it, and most of us do this, right? We play with a Ouija board at a party so that guy or girl will cuddle up a little closer to us when it says something creepy, and we're trying to freak each other out. And we're in that moment. I've said it. Tim, I believe, would be right beside me that if the two of us drop dead tomorrow, you can guarantee if I decide to hang out as a ghost, I'm going to be the one pushing your planchette, spelling "you're going to die" and laughing my ghost ass off about it, watching you affect. It doesn't mean it's demonic. It's the nature of the human element or the spirit or even our ability to move these things because we're in a place of fear. We're predicting what we're afraid might actually come, which is a big part of, even what the scripture teaches, that what you focus on comes to you, right? Good, bad, or indifferent. And that could be a big aspect of this. That's why people have these moments, because they're expecting bad. They're always seeing the bad.
Yeah, and I want to point something out about what you just said, and there's a lot to unpack there, but I think it's really important as we're talking about the demonic, because again, there's the crowd that sees a demon behind every doorway, and there's a danger in that for a lot of reasons. But when you talk to even the Catholic Church, right, and they're the ones that they have the exorcism right, they've got a real streamlined way of dealing with this. They will tell you that the vast majority of cases in which people think that they're dealing with demons, they are not. That it is a very small percentage of the cases that are presented to them that they actually believe to be authentic. And I think that gets lost in translation. I'm not a Catholic. I'm an evangelical. I come from a totally different realm. And actually, many evangelical churches don't even deal with this issue. They don't talk about it. It's that opposite end, right? Of we're just not going to address this issue. But again, very small percentage of cases dealing with that. And I do have a chapter on the Ouija board, which I think now, again, I'm talking in this book to Christian theologians and pastors. And so it is fascinating. I mean, most would say stay away from a Ouija board. But I do think what you said about the intentionality of this, the thing that gives something power or the ability for it to be a doorway for people would be intentionally trying to use it to reach the dead, intentionally trying to, and there are people who do this. I mean, and you would know this, I'm sure you've interacted with many of them, but this is what they do. They use these tools to communicate with the dead. Now, if we're told not to do that, in Scripture, and not everybody believes it's true, but we believe Scripture is true, then we probably should avoid doing it. If we choose to do it, 9 times out of 10, nothing will happen, but it may happen. And there are people, I've actually known some, and I've talked to people for this book who that was a starting point for them, that they were using a Ouija board and they experienced things they believed to be not a plate falling off the wall, much more invasive and expansive issues.
Much more profound.
Right. So where they felt controlled, right? So, and the level to which control can happen, that's a whole other, conversation. I do want to mention, if you don't mind, another story that I find interesting, and I'd love to get your take on it.
You're on a radio show and want to tell another story?
I do. I mean, can you imagine?
Billy Hallowell, our guest, Playing with Fire, a modern investigation into demons, exorcism, and ghosts. We'll be back with Billy's story right after this.
Hi, this is Kelsey Grammer. When military service members head into battle, none are expected to face the enemy alone, but many return home and become isolated as they struggle with the visible and invisible wounds of war. It can be difficult knowing how to overcome that challenge and rekindle bonds similar to those formed in the military. Wounded Warrior Project supports these injured veterans through their recoveries by connecting them with fellow warriors and their communities. No one should fight this battle alone. Join us at woundedwarriorproject.org.
Adopt US Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting a Teenager. Learning the lingo.
Jelly. Jelly adjective. Jelly is a shorter, better way to say jealous. As in, Chloe, I am like so jelly of your unicorn phone case.
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same. Visit adoptuskids.org, brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
We're back. This is the best in paranormal talk radio. Why? Because we have guests like Billy Hallowell. His book, Playing with Fire, a modern investigation into demons, exorcism, and ghosts. It is available September 8th. We've got a link for it on today's show, so you can find it and order the book, read the book. Make sure that then you go and rate and review the book. I know I say this ad nauseum, but I mean it, folks. This helps authors like this get the word out, get their stories pushed to the top of Amazon lists, bestseller lists. If you do that, that's how we're going to see more great content like this from amazing authors like Billy Hallowell. All right, you had another story that you felt was equally compelling you wanted to share with us. Please, go ahead.
I did. And this one, it's different from the Indiana case. This is a woman out in Arkansas. Her name is Amy, and I encountered her story while I was writing the book. I was actually, for something told me, do a news search, see if anybody else has covered any of these stories, because you know how it is. The mainstream press, they generally don't dive into these. That's what made Indiana so interesting. But in this case, there was a local affiliate out in Arkansas, and they dove into this woman's story. Her claim was that she had been completely healthy, never had any sort of mental illness, never had any sort of affliction, and she was a nurse. She was a marathon runner, again, super healthy. And one day she's at work. She's in the hospital working, and she treats this burn victim, and she remembered this, treating this guy. And one of the interesting details, she said, we thought it was a meth fire. There was some sort of meth lab explosion or fire that unfolded at the time. So she treats the guy. She walks out of the room, and suddenly she's just like, I'm not feeling well. Something doesn't feel right. And so she ends up going down to the emergency room to work, and I forgot which floor she worked on, but they would flow over into the emergency room, and she can't do her job. She gets there, she just can't do it. So she goes home, sleeps it off, and the next day she tries to go running. She can't run in a straight line. And within I think it was about 8 days, institution, she goes through a total descension mentally during this week and a half. Now, she loses her job. She goes into a deep depression. And so, of course, they start trying to treat her. And so she goes through all these courses of treatment. And within 8 months, I mean, this goes on for 8 months, bizarre behavior, just doing things you can't imagine. And so she's telling this local affiliate her story. Now, this all culminates, and I go into great detail in the book, with an event in which Amy is sitting on her windowsill on the second floor of her house. And she wasn't hearing a voice, but she had this idea in her head, end your life, end your life. She was consumed with this idea suddenly after never having, according to her, any suicidal thought in her life to end her life. And so she sits on the windowsill, and just imagine this. She's looking into her house. So she's on the windowsill. The window is at her back, and the window is open, and she drops herself. She doesn't jump. She just gently drops herself out of the window, 2 stories down to the ground, obviously lands on the concrete, and nearly dies. And in this process, to this day, is paralyzed from her waist down. Now, Amy's story is fascinating for a number of reasons. She goes to the hospital. This woman who is into deliverance ministry, which I'm sure people will know that's similar to exorcism. It's sort of the Protestant version, to simplify it, of exorcism. A woman hears about her story, comes to the hospital, prays over her, performs a deliverance, and after she gets weaned off her medicine, she claims she has been fine, has never had a mental problem again, has never experienced anything other than the paralysis from that event. So I'm condensing that story for the sake of the show, but it's compelling. I've interviewed her numerous times. I've spoken with her. And the thing to me that makes these stories compelling is when people don't want to share them, or when they're cautious about sharing them. And I think they don't want to be called crazy. In Amy's case, she's been willing to share it with the motivation of trying to help others avoid what she went through. But what is unique, and then I'll stop talking and I'll let you talk about her case, is that she can't pinpoint. For a lot of Christians, they'll say, okay, well, I was using a Ouija board nonstop. I was seeing psychics, and I was doing all these different things, and that was my entry point maybe. She can't figure out what it was. She was a churchgoer. She felt that she was a Christian beforehand and has not been able to pinpoint what that starting point of this circumstance was for her. She's got a compelling story. Can I say definitively that it's what she believes it is? I can't, but I present the details in the book.
Hey, that's weird, right? I mean, did she somehow absorb something from this patient? From, can we guilt by association? Can we be afflicted by something just by being near it or in its presence? I don't know. That is certainly chilling and a lot terrifying than just, praying to Satan and this occurs, right? I mean,
dropping out of a window to me, and that's what makes and I've interacted with her a number of times, very, very sweet person, and she was willing to be interviewed for the book. And, we even did an on-camera Zoom interview recently, and I'm watching this woman whose entire life, she can't be a nurse anymore. Her entire life was impacted by this one moment during this time of struggle, and it lasted 8 months. And to see, you could argue, okay, she lost her mind, she went crazy, but she had no history of that. And after this happened, and by the way, what I didn't mention is at different times during that 8 months, she was speaking in another voice to her husband. She doesn't remember these things. She was telling people, which she also doesn't remember, that she had a demon. So I find it fascinating to interact with people who have gone through these things. But to drop yourself out of a window in that way is one of the most horrifying things. Just the way she told the story, I don't know. It still gives me chills.
Yeah, no doubt. That's horrific. And that she has to live with this as an ongoing aspect of her life. So again, when you talk to her, was she involved in the paranormal? Did she play with Ouija boards? Did she watch horror movies? Was she, that's what so many people are afraid of. If I even watch a paranormal TV show, will that open a door to me? If I play with the Ouija board, will that open the door? If I listen to my Slayer album, will that open a door? And I don't know. I mean, again, music is music to me. If throughout the lyrics of the music, it's incantations calling forth hatred and the devil, maybe that does have something, because what is incantation? What is prayer but words with intention? And maybe something intention. Like that can be, be a part of it. I'm not sure.
I think the Ouija board differs, and here's why. And I know people, again, will not like me saying this. I think the difference is you have a tool that the entire premise of it, even though it's a game, is to do that very thing that most Christians believe you're not really supposed to do. So even if it's a parlor game for most people, the intentionality behind it and the origins of it, and I go into the origins of it. One of the things that struck me as the most bizarre, and of course it could just be circumstance. Gould, I'm forgetting his first name right now, the guy who owned the factory where he was making the Ouija board in the early 1900s. He fell off of the factory, of the Ouija board factory, and died. And you hear the story and you go through, and there's other elements. People claim he said the board told him to build that factory. There are some strange elements to the story behind the Ouija board, but I've had people in other interviews ask me, well, what if I go and, and these are Christians, right? And I get a statue of another religious figure and I bring that into my house just because I like the art and I think it's cool. Or what if I go and I do whatever? This is similar to the music example you just gave. And they will say, well, I think I'm okay because it's different from a tool that I'm using to try to do this thing. I think we can have those debates all day long. I think as a Christian, I would say, pray about it before you're going to do it. If you feel convicted that you shouldn't do it, then maybe you shouldn't do it. I would tend to say, based on my experience, and not everybody has this experience, maybe avoid things like the Ouija board. So I think you can have this debate again all day long about what the entryway is for Amy. In her case, she had mentioned, I think, that she might have played with the Ouija board as a kid. The drug portion, and I didn't go deep with her on this, I thought was interesting because some of the other interviews I had with people who have dealt with infestation of places, which I also talk about in Playing with Fire, they had said that places where there were a lot of drug deals, for instance, that could be a place that might attract the demonic, right, to that location. And so that's a whole other conversation, but I think it's super interesting.
All right. One thing that I'm curious about as well is faith, and the faith to combat evil or to stand up to evil. One thing that Tim and I have heard numerous times over the years on the show is that there have been people that believe that they are afflicted with something dark, something demonic. When they reach out to the church often deflects them, or will straight up admit, we are not prepared to deal with this.
Yes.
What the hell? You're a man of God, a woman of God. What do you mean you're not prepared? And in some instances, they go in and it gets worse because the faith maybe was lacking.
They haven't done it. Right. They're not prepared. They're literally not prepared.
How are they not prepared? Now, it's interesting to me that when we started the show, the concept of exorcists, obviously was out there, but it wasn't, ever since 1977 or whatever, when the movie came out, the popularity of exorcism and that theory and belief has grown exponentially. But I remember 14, 15 years ago, this kind of wave started to hit, and the Vatican started doing more classes on exorcisms, which made Tim and I scratch our heads. Why? Yeah. Is it that the world really needs it, or everybody that's part of the clergy should feel comfortable dealing with this aspect so they can answer these questions and deal with it? But, why do you think clergy is so reluctant to help?
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there. And I want to start here. I mentioned we did a survey. We asked these faith leaders, we said to them, listen, do you believe that demons exist, and can they, infect people's lives? And 80 to 85% of those who were surveyed in the different questions said, absolutely, we believe that. So they were all on board with basically what the Bible says, that they believe that this happens. But when it came to the question of, are some churches and pastors not doing enough, almost 80% of them agreed. So here are the leaders of the churches saying, the vast majority of them saying, we're not doing enough to address this. And that was really compelling to me because I think there's a lot of things going on here. First and foremost, you have, in the Catholic Church, they have to get permission, right? So a priest needs to get permission to do it. Not everybody is trained to do it. And so it's supposed to be a trained exorcist who goes in and does it. Now, in the Protestant tradition, because there's no Pope and there's no centralized, as system, every denomination, every church, especially if they're independent churches, they may have their own way of dealing with it. On one hand, I think there's really, because of the material world that we're in and the focus, I think the world is sort of seeped into the church in a way in which people feel weird talking about these topics. I mean, you have a whole show about it, which I think is fascinating. But B, because of that weirdness, then that translates into let's not talk about it. Let's put it to the side. And when you do that over time, it becomes a topic that's not being addressed at all. And so we've seen that happen in a lot of churches. And that to me is troubling for a lot of reasons. And I can unpack that more. So there's that. And I also think, too, just the general ignorance of it and the fear of it. I think even some pastors are afraid of looking weird by talking about it. And so it all just comes together in this strange realm of, having people who are spiritually ill needing help, or at least they believe they are. The majority of them might not be, and they're going to you for help, and you're not even prepared to give them anything. That's unacceptable to me. So I think the other problem, so the other piece of this, and I know I'm jumping around, but there's just so much, is that you have a situation in which everybody I spoke with, and I'm seeing this in the rare times that individual dioceses speak out in the Catholic Church, they're saying that the requests for help are through the roof, and they are increasing, and that because of that, you have a bigger need, and you have more people believing at least that they're in need of that. And in fact, in 2019, the Vatican, for the first time, invited non-Catholics to come in to their exorcism training, right? So they are recognizing that there needs to be a broader conversation with other Christians who are not Catholic, who need to come in and talk about this issue and share what they're seeing in the field. So there's a lot happening there, and we could then have a debate and a discussion about why. If there truly is an increase, we also know there's a mental health increase, right, going on at the same time. So people will have that debate as well. But if we really believe that there's an increase, we have to then try to talk about what's driving that increase.
Did you speak to clergy that felt that they were not prepared to deal with a dark force?
I did not. I specifically sought out people who I knew had experience in this, but I spoke with people who had sought help, and I intentionally did this, from pastors who were not prepared to help them. And so that was something that I found fascinating, to kind of hear that perspective, right? So if you're the person going for help and you're being turned away, what is that like for you, right? I mean, how do you process that? And this is why a lot of people, even some people in the Protestant world, end up at the Catholic Church, because they have a system for dealing with it. And if your church doesn't, and there's no other deliverance minister or another person around you who you can find, well, where are you going to go? You're going to go to the place that has the system to deal with it. So there were a couple cases. One in the book, which is an infestation case, is Bob Cranmer out in Pennsylvania.
Sure.
I
on the show, yeah.
I was going to say, I know for a fact you've had Bob on, and talking with him through his experience. And I will tell you, when I was at the Blaze writing, his case was one of the ones that we covered. And what I found fascinating at the time was that none of the key stakeholders in the beginning who he said, hey, these people were involved in my case, because that's the first thing I do. I want to know, if you're telling me you had demons in your house, I want to know who was in your house, who saw it, and I want to talk to them. It took a very long time. It was like pulling teeth to get people in his case to speak, but everybody in the end validated what he said happened. And I found that, again, so fascinating, to have off the record people within the Catholic Church telling me things that I'm thinking, wow, now why don't they want to talk publicly about it, right? And that's a whole other conversation. It actually adds credence, I think, to the story to a degree when people aren't as willing to talk about it. But yeah, Bob's case is phenomenal too, and I think it points to some interesting, elements, and it makes you wonder: is this real? And I believe it is.
When seeking help, who do you suggest people go to? And what if my neighbor who's Jewish is having this happen and his faith doesn't feel that they can handle this? Should he go to a Catholic priest? Should he go to a Presbyterian minister? Should he go to a Buddhist temple? What do you suggest in these situations when somebody can't find help through their religious beliefs?
That's an interesting question, and there are a lot of different viewpoints on how to deal with that, right? As a Christian, I believe John 3:16. I believe Jesus died for our sins. I believe the core of the gospel, that we inherit salvation through that he overcame the world, and that he is going to be the solution to this. So if somebody were to come to me and they were to say, what should I do? I would say, I believe that the solution to the darkness is the light. And that's what I believe the light is. And so it's a challenge, though, because there's a lot of different viewpoints. If somebody doesn't believe, if they're not a Christian, is a Christian going to be able to help them? Some of the deliverance ministers will say no. They'll say you really need to get to a place where you want to make the change that is needed, which would be essentially embracing Christ in order to bring that in, or you have to have an openness to it. I know you look at the Bible and you see what Jesus says, that you can expel the demons, but if you go back to whatever activity or whatever it was, and by the way, some believe it's unrepentant sin that goes on and on and on that can open a door. That's another point of debate. That when you go back to those things, you're going to have 7 times the problem that you had before. So I would say, I don't care who you are, what you believe right now. I think the baseline thing I would recommend that people do is they seek out a pastor, a deliverance minister. But here's the thing too, and I want to, before I even give that advice, because I don't want to give bad advice. If somebody is expressing these sorts of issues, I would find first, before anything else, a Christian counselor, psychologist, because I think it's important that we don't just send people who are struggling with legitimate mental illness to go and get a spiritual solution to something that isn't spiritual. And so I cover that in the book. That's a really,
but isn't that's a slippery slope too, because I don't want to be considered crazy. I don't want to be considered mental in any way. But if I believe it's a spiritual affliction and I go to the church and the church refuses to help me unless I go get psychological counseling, I know there's a danger on both sides, but it almost seems like, wouldn't it be in the best interest of churches to have a priest or a pastor on hand that is heavily sated in psychology, so that they can do this, give them the religious, I guess, support that the person feels they need while dealing with the psychology of it without giving the stigma of being crazy.
Yeah, no, well, and here's the thing. I would actually say there's 2 things, because you asked for the advice. So the advice would be, when I say a Christian counselor, I'm talking about, and I actually, there are names of people in Playing with Fire, and I'm sure I don't want to send an influx of people to these folks, but there are people who can help with it, who are open, because you don't want to go to somebody who's not open to the fact that this exists, right? Within the church, and many Protestant churches do this too, but the Catholic Church, as well as certain Protestant churches, their first line of defense is going to be, you've come in, I believe you have this issue, right? Pending you're going to the right place. We want to make sure they actually they're supposed to do their due diligence to basically root out mental illness and to look at that and see, okay, have mistakes been made? Absolutely. And I cover some of these cases in the book that are just heartbreaking, where people assumed that somebody was dealing with the demonic, or maybe the person was, but the solution to it was horrific. It involved beating. I mean, all of these things that can go wrong when you don't go to the right place for help. But any good church that's dealing with this, or pastor, they would go into it prayerfully, and they would assess it to see whether or not there is a mental affliction going on. We have to be able to differentiate between those 2 things. And I am not a psychologist, right? But I would trust that some of the people, or people like those who I spoke with in the book, either on the psychological front or the church front, would have the ability to discern. And, what's interesting is you can Google the people who do deliverance ministry in your community, and you can see who's out there. And it becomes quick to see who is good and who is not, who has a track record and who doesn't. And it is worth speaking to people. But you have to remember there are different viewpoints on all of these things. And so it can be a little messy trying to find the right place to go. So it's tough. It's tough to give definitive advice on that. But you want to make sure that you have rooted out that you're not treating somebody who has a mental illness with spiritual solutions, and you're not treating somebody who has a spiritual illness with only mental solutions, right?
Agreed. We are friends with a gentleman who is a deliverance minister, Reverend Bill Bean. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on the aspect of charging. Now, when Bill was offering to help, he helped for quite a while, and then I know that he began charging to help. And I said, Bill, that seems kind of cruel, these people. And he goes, Dave, I'm also just a man. I can't afford to fly, drive, sleep over, do these things on my own to bring them the help. If I didn't know I was doing the job and I wasn't helping them, I wouldn't do this and I wouldn't go there. But I mean, we know, because he's been a friend of our show for years, and I've never once had somebody come to me that said that they went for his help and did not get help, or that it didn't work. So the concept, some people believe, well, if I have to pay for it, then it's not going to help me. Do you have any thoughts on that at all?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think, my initial reaction is always to say, oh, no, you shouldn't charge. But the reality of what you just presented is that there are people who are literally flying all over the country as deliverance ministers to help people. So if somebody in New York is calling somebody in Washington and they can't find anybody in New York to help them, and this person is getting on a plane and going over there, it's understandable why you might ask for a small honorarium, why you might ask for a donation, right? If this is a ministry and ministries receive donations, one could argue, well, this person is seeking a donation. But I think, again, it's all about motivation. And what I do love that you said is that, with Bill, what his motivation is. It's hard when we don't know the motivation of a person. And it's like anything else. It's almost like you need a Yelp for this sort of thing, right? Like you need a place to be able to go and say, and which maybe that's an idea for you to launch a place though, where there's a legitimate list of people who have been vetted. And it sounds, crazy maybe, but I think at this point, there are so many people looking for help. And so if you're seeing a person on a list like that, or a person like you've described, and they've helped other people and people are vouching for them, then you might be willing to cover their airfare, to cover their expenses, and throw them a few $100s. So I think it can be a slippery slope though. And the thing about church is that most churches are taking in donations, and this is just part of their ministry, right? So somebody like Bill, I think it's different because that's the only thing they might be. I don't know if in his case this is the truth, but that may be the only thing they're doing.
It right. keeps him moving 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I mean, he takes time off to be okay for himself, but his full-time job has basically been going out and helping people. There's that much of a call, and people not feeling that they're getting help elsewhere. And again, I know I feel a sense of responsibility when I'm going to recommend somebody to help, and people have come to me and said, who can do this? And I say, Bill Bean has got a remarkable track record with helping people, and he doesn't just show up, sprinkle you with holy water, say a few prayers, and leave and take your money. I know that he continues to talk to people and counsel them over the phone and over Skype, and he really integrates himself into their lives to help. So I've always felt confident in recommending him. And like I said, I have not once to this date in 10 years of being friends with him had somebody contact me and say, I still need help. It didn't work. Can you find me somebody else? Most everybody feels pretty placated after they deal with Bill and feel like they've gotten somewhere, that they got the response that they needed, which is great, right? But here's a guy who's kind of a lay minister in a sense, obviously it's become a trade, and he went to theology school and everything that he could to strengthen, but that wasn't his original calling in life.
Yeah, and I think, and see, that's the thing. I think it's important that context is always key. And so I do think we have to be wary if somebody's charging a lot of money and they've made this into a business. It's different if it's a ministry and this is what they need to do to survive. They have bills to pay and they're flying around the country doing this. So this is a new world for me, honestly. I mean, if you were to say to me 2 years ago, hey, you're going to go write a book about this, I would have probably said, oh, you're crazy. But here we are, and I think it's so important. I don't so much care if people, I'm a Christian. I want to point people towards the Bible. That's what I want to do. But I want to understand this issue. And I think there are going to be areas of disagreement, right? There's things I've said you probably disagree with. We're going to disagree about it. We're trying to understand things where there is some mystery. Even if you're taking the Bible and you're saying, I want to understand. We talked about the children, right? There's going to be debate. There's going to be discussion. But I think the most dangerous thing, and this was my takeaway from this, is to pretend this isn't happening and to pretend that this doesn't exist. I don't think we need to be consumed with it. I don't think we should be giving power to it. I love that you said that before. Let's not give power to something that, by having fear of it, because I don't believe as a Christian I need to fear it. But I think to ignore the impact that evil is having on the world around us is to almost be ignorant of the news that is happening. I mean, you watch the news for 10 minutes and you're like, oh my gosh, there's at least 12 cases that are things that are happening that make me wonder. Now, am I saying they're all being influenced by evil? No, some of it is bad decision making, like we talked about. But I think we know enough about what is happening to know that there are pervasive issues happening in life and in culture. And if people are truly calling with more phone calls or making more phone calls for help, that something is driving that. And so I think we need to be aware of that, and we need to talk about it and again, be okay with disagreements as we try to get to the answers.
Agreed. And, I haven't disagreed with the things that you've said. I think it's fascinating and a great way to kind of open people's eyes to new concepts. Now, we've been talking a lot about demons and the demonic realm. What is your take on ghosts? What was, going into this research? We all want to know that we survive the physical realm, that we go somewhere. The Christian faith has us believe we go to heaven or wherever we're off to next, reincarnation, whatever people have in their wheelhouse of beliefs. But the concept of ghosts, lost or stranded souls, spirits that have, are fearful perhaps to move on for judgment. Doesn't it seem like there's an angle to religion that's dangerous in the way that people, obviously there has to be laws and there has to be repercussions to situations. If we feel like, God's an all forgiving God, so I can go kill my neighbor and then just pray and it's all taken away, that doesn't work. And that's why we have laws.
Yeah.
But then living in a state of fear of death, a healthy respect seems like a better thing than fear. But most Christians, most people are brought up with this fear of death because there will be repentance, there will be not necessarily salvation at the end of the ride, but judgment. And that's a scary term for people. So talking about ghosts, what do you believe they are? And do you think the fear of judgment plays into this?
Yeah, no, I think that's so interesting. I actually think that I agree with what you just said. A lot of people live that way. A lot of Christians live that way. I think it's a misreading of scripture that leads to that, and a misunderstanding of, just before I answer the ghost part, of what we're supposed to be focused on, because it's so true. You could walk around acting any way you want and then saying, well, on my deathbed, I'm just going to, say, oh, Jesus, come into my heart and I'm all good. I've been forgiven. But it goes back to intentionality too. When you look at what the Bible says and you look at what Jesus says, he says you're supposed to live your entire life, 2 commands, right? The 10 commandments can be summarized into 2: love God and love others. And that's truth and love. That's that balance. And so it is interesting how many people, I think, live under fear when we're not supposed to be living under fear. And the idea of judgment, that our actions will be judged and they will be weighted. But I think that has to do more with how well did we live that command out of loving God and loving others. And so to me, death is not really something to be feared. I think it's normal to fear death. I think that we're not supposed to. I think we're supposed to try to get to a place where we understand that, there's going to be an afterlife. And this is, again, within the Christian realm, that there is a heaven and a hell. Now, there are so many different questions about when you die, do you go straight to heaven, straight to hell? Some believe you remain behind. There's also a school of thought in the Christian world, in which people believe that you're sort of asleep until the end of time, right? So until the end of days. So you're asleep until the end times, and then that's when everybody then goes into judgment. So there's lots of different viewpoints, but the ghost viewpoint, and I was fascinated by this just in research and looking at this, is not one that is very prevalent among Christian leaders. So the majority of Christian leaders did not believe that people died and remained behind to haunt a place. And so I know there are probably a lot of listeners or people who are hearing this that would say, well, I believe in ghosts, and lots of Americans do. With this book and diving into, interviewing theologians and pastors and talking to people, there was a real argument and sense that when you connect, if you connect with something through a Ouija board, or if you see a medium and you're trying to connect with a lost loved one, that you're not actually connecting with that person, that you're connecting with a demonic force that wants you to believe that it is a deceased person. And there are so many different elements of the discussion that are fascinating, but I do think if we're going to be fair to Scripture, so for a Christian to say that, they would say, okay, well, I have to go back to the Bible and I have to look and see, are there examples of people dying and coming back to haunt willy-nilly, kind of on their own, without any reason for being there? And so when you dive into Scripture, you find some really interesting stories. One is Samuel being summoned by Saul in the Old Testament, that Saul is afraid. He wants to know what's going to happen. And so he violates his own rules. He had banished, mediums and psychics and everything else, but yet he goes to one and asks her to bring Samuel about. And so the woman conjures Samuel up, and even she's surprised by her ability to do that, which is actually really interesting. We don't know why she's surprised. Was she a fraud? I don't know. Or was she just surprised it was able to happen? Now, in that case, somebody might say, well, clearly that was a ghost. But there are a million reasons why that could have happened. And it could have been an image, an apparition. It might not have actually been Samuel's ghost. You have another example after Jesus's death where you have people essentially and I never noticed this, but coming out of their tombs and like walking into town and witnessing to people. And so you have more like a zombie-like situation there, I think. And I mean, I'm saying that in jest. I think people would have other ways of framing it. But all of those events seem to be tied, and others like it, to really things that God was allowing to happen in that moment. We don't have a lot of examples in Scripture of people dying and coming back in a haunting sort of sense. And so that's a lot of information. But from that baseline, I think it's hard for Christians to make the argument that they believe that this is happening. I think the argument of it's a demonic force, it's trying to get your trust, is actually very interesting.
You know, the world stands back and we watch religion and we watch what happens. I've been very vocal about the fact that I had a falling out with the church element of my religion after 9/11. When I went to church and saw that the practice wasn't about helping people to heal. And I, just so people understand, it wasn't one church I went to. I went to numerous churches seeking, like many of us did. That was a time in our country and in our world when more people turned to religion. Churches were overwhelmed and busting at the seams. And it was a quick little formulaic, God works in mysterious ways. Now let's talk about tithing. We've got more people in church than we have had in decades. Let's turn it into a money-making situation. And I witnessed it. And now I understand that there are some people around the United States, and they've written to me vocally about, well, that's BS in my church. Well, that's great. But I don't live in Bumble, Tennessee, or in Iowa, or where your great church was. I'm telling you, this is what happened. And this isn't just a lone case. I've spoken to masses of people that feel this disjointed sense that religion and religious leaders are not prepared to deal with real chaos and real situations. And then we watch the tragedies that have unfolded in the Catholic Church with sexual misconduct. And you wonder just who is protected from dark forces when your hierarchy of religious leaders seem fallible to this and weak and fearful of taking on the devil or taking on dark forces to help their followers. It puts people in a state where religion, Christianity, whatever form people are believing in, that faith is rocked. And maybe that's what the whole idea of this is by the devil or by these dark entities, is to just continually shake that ship until it falls apart so that people have left that and gone. And maybe that's what we have to look beyond. But it's hard when even the leaders of your church seem less focused on strong messages and more about money and about laying judgment on people. One of the churches I went to, in the middle of the service, he began calling out homosexuals in the church.
Man. Oh, gosh.
And people began standing up and walking out, and he didn't stop because he felt the righteous indignation of God, and he was able to. And I thought, the Bible teaches to love and leave the judgment to God. You can try to walk people down that path by showing them the way, but it doesn't mean that you make them feel bad.
No,
it doesn't mean that you beat them. Christ sat with the sinners, not with the saints, because that's who needed him. Yeah,
and everything you just said is so important. You said so many things that I think, when we talk about loving God and loving others, it's, God expects us to love him. And that doesn't just mean, oh, I love God. That means abiding by what his standards are, and we may not always agree with his standards. It's not we're not supposed to take God like Plato and mold him around what we believe. We're supposed to mold ourselves and allow him to mold us into what his standards are and what he believes. But the second part of that, loving others, even if we have different standards than other people, even if we believe things different, we're supposed to love them. He says, love your enemies, for goodness sake. I mean, you can go down this path. And I do think, your experience is one that a lot of people have in churches. I am very fortunate. I live just outside of New York City. I go to a great church. My pastor, they actually put the collection plate outside. They don't do a collection during church. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong to do a collection. I do think, again, it goes back to motivation. They put it outside in the back, and people on their own will go over and put money in, before church, after church. That's how it's done in our church. Now, not everybody would like that. I love that he does it that way. He never makes you feel – he doesn't even talk about an offering. It doesn't come up during our services. Now, again, offerings are fine, but what's the motivation? And I think, to your point, the most dangerous thing for faith is for pastors and church leaders and others to make the mistake of mistreating people, to make the mistake of not living out. And we're all humans, by the way, so this will happen. But when it happens, we have to repent for it, and we need to do the right thing. To your point of the attack on the church, let's say, and even if you're an atheist, listen to this, even if you're a person who doesn't believe in God, understand that the idea that Satan is out there and that he wants to steal and destroy and separate people from God, one of the most compelling things and most impactful things he could do would be to destroy churches from the inside out, and to destroy not just the church, but people's faith in him because of the church. And I think the mistake we make is to put our faith, and I've been so guilty of this before, in the institutions and the people. You're going to be let down every time, because we're all human beings. Human beings run churches. Human beings run Christian organizations. We will be let down every time when we associate 100% that person with God. Yes, they're supposed to live that out. Yes, they're supposed to do it. But I've found that the more I've been able to put my faith in God, the more I'm able to understand that people are going to make those mistakes. Now, that is not an excuse to say that what you went through was okay. It's not. Churches need to be better. They need to stand up. They need to lead people the right way, because here's the deal. The more people who separate themselves from faith because of that hypocrisy, the more people are actually in danger of being impacted. And I'm not saying possessed. That could obviously happen in rare cases, but actually having their lives be impacted by the very things they no longer believe are happening, because those things are real and they are happening. So I don't know. That's a lot. I know I threw a lot out there, but I understand everything you're saying.
It's great. It's great to challenge people's paradigms and thoughts. And again, folks, understand, I'm not slamming the Christian faith. I'm not slamming any one church. But you brought up Catholics and all of the sexual misconduct because it's part of the news. Not talking about it is just as stupid. I talk about it to discuss the concepts of everyone is fallible. And, it's tough because, listen, we do hold people in authority to higher standards. That's why there is the Black Lives Matter and the Blue Line Matters. And, the police matter. There are bad police. There are bad accountants. There are bad dentists.
Bad everyone.
And, right. It goes without saying. So you need to focus on the ones that are doing good, find new ways to remove the bad, break organizations that keep bad people in play, and fix those structures. The same with the religious sector. And yes, these pastors and priests need psychological help, spiritual help. I don't believe that they need to be cast aside as lepers, spiritual lepers, but they need to be fixed and made sure never to be put in a situation where they will be lording over vulnerable people again. So there are ways to show compassion, love, and still give them the ideal of faith.
No, and I think that we live in this, and I talk a little bit about, I talk a lot at the end of the book of Playing with Fire about culture and how is culture being impacted by all of these things. And, I think we can have debates and discussions all day long about whether or not a pastor who has fallen is being oppressed or impacted by evil. At the end of the day, even if you're oppressed, which means that you're not being possessed, but you have evil is impacting your life in some way. There are ideas being put into your head, lies being put into your head. You still have the free will and the choice to make the choices that you make. And so to turn around and blame that all on evil, I think is disingenuous, and it is not appropriate. But I would say, these situations are all very complicated. When you look at the Bible, what's so interesting to me, and the part that kept standing out to me of Scripture as I was writing this book, was Ephesians 6. When you get into Ephesians 6:10, I think it's like 10 through 18, and it talks about the armor of God, and there's a bunch of interesting lines in there. But there are a lot of people who might be like, well, then how do I avoid having these pitfalls? Even people in the church, how does a pastor avoid falling into the trap of loving money more than people, right? Which happens. It happens all the time. And the answer is actually in that part of Scripture, and it's fascinating. It says, put on the full armor of God, and then it talks about, and I think it's verse 12. It says the struggle is not against flesh and blood, but it's against authorities and rulers and powers of darkness. That there is something going on that we're not seeing, that evil is there, but that you have to put on that armor. Well, what does that mean? I think for the Christian, that means waking up, not just saying, oh, I believe in Jesus once, because you brought up before, you could say a prayer and say you believe in God and then live your life however you want, and you feel like you're covered. Well, that's not what Christianity is. What Christianity is putting on that armor every day, meaning you're praying, you're connected to God, you're loving God and loving others for your entire life with effort. It's not a one-time thing. And so that's how you fight back against those things. And I would say for me, writing this book actually gave me a great peace, and being able to look at all of these different pieces of the puzzle and to say evil is real, it's there. I can't answer every single question. I can present to people what these Christian leaders believe is there, and not everybody's going to agree with that, and the stories, which are universal, that people have gone through, and then we can make our determinations about what we believe from there. But you've got to, in my mind, it's an effort that happens every day, and part of that effort is avoiding the pitfalls you're speaking about by putting on that armor.
Right, but again, understanding that we're all flesh and blood, tender and bleed underneath, right? And and we have to give patience. And maybe my problem was, as a leader myself, I should have spoken with the leaders of the church at the time and said, this is what I see. Is there another way to repackage this so that you're giving more sense of hope and more sense of compassion and less divining of the money, and this is how it's being perceived. And I guess maybe there is a sin to that fact as well, of not standing up for what's right and not saying the things that should be said and done. But getting back, we're going way off topic on this.
But I think it's great.
We need to be held accountable when we're looking into the paranormal, and we're looking at the aspect of life, right? It's being held accountable, being aware that what you do impacts not just you but others, maybe even in the spiritual realm. I know I'm cognizant of that, and I try to be careful. I do my prayers before I do investigations, after investigations. I try to do blessings over my house to protect it, but it doesn't mean that things don't get through from time to time. And sometimes it's our ego that gets in the way. We forget that we're not untouchable. We forget that these things take place. And that's why you have to be diligent. You can't just, prop a door open for your cat and not realize that a raccoon or a skunk or a porcupine could climb in as well. You've got to be prepared that when you do these things, there are repercussions. You don't have to wear a helmet when you go biking, but we see what happens to those that unfortunately have accidents that don't. You don't have to wear your seatbelt when you get in the car, but we see that the mortality rate is much higher in car accidents than those that don't. We see these things in play. So you just have to take accountability for the steps. If you want to communicate with the dead, you want to understand the dead, you want to speak with spirits, you have to realize the depth of it. That's why I've told people, I wrote a book for teens on ghost hunting, and I took a lot of hell for that. Why would you do that? So I said, really, most of us began our journey as teenagers who had experiences. There's nobody to teach them. Why would we not teach them the right ways and give them the fundamentals of this is why we do these things, not for the X Games theory of this is exciting and dynamic and might threaten our lives, but that if we're trying to do this, we're trying to help, we're trying to understand, we're trying to get answers. It's, again, the intention to which you put into these different aspects of the supernatural. And I think that's partly what keeps us protected is is that intention? And I can't use that word enough. And we talk about it on the show. We talked about it a few weeks ago when we talked about superhuman, making the visible or the invisible visible. You need the intention in everything, in every aspect of what you do to see success, to see a better outcome. And that is more imperative than ever now in a world that's filled with anger, hatred, resentment, disease, pestilence. It's easy to go dark.
Yeah.
And we need to stay up on this.
No, and I think that, getting people to talk about it and understand it is the first step too. And I think that is we live in such a material world, and it's the selfie world, right? Everybody is consumed with themselves, and we're all guilty of it at different moments. And I think it's so easy to be sucked into this vacuum of assuming that we're always going to be here. We live life like we're never going to die. We look around us. We don't see the beauty and the amazing complication and everything that was created. We don't see ourselves, I think, as a creation. And when you really stop and think about it, when critics will say, well, this stuff is weird. Why did you write a book about it? Why are you going into this? It's like, listen, existence is weird. The fact that we're all here is very strange. And it goes back to that quest to understand why. And I believe the Bible gives us that baseline of understanding what we need to understand. And there are mysteries that we will one day know that we don't know now, but I think we have a lot of what we need there. And so, for me, I think we've got to start having the conversations, having the debates and the discussions, and at the end of the day, making sure that we're taking those steps to put on that armor of God and to make sure that we are living that calling of, in my view, loving God and loving others.
Agreed. Fascinating stuff. Great book, folks. Playing with Fire, a modern investigation into demons, exorcism, and ghosts. Billy Hallowell, our guest. Billy, we'd love to have you visit with us again in the future. Would you like to do that?
I would love to do that. Let's do it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That's it for this week, kids. We will be back again Tuesday with more True Crime Tuesday, and back again next week with more of the best in paranormal talk radio. I'm Dave. That's Tim. This is Darkness Radio.